Hi folks, it's James here. How are you all doing? Going to do my response to this quarantine vinyl tag which is going around. I think it was Dylan at Noble Records who started this, so I thought I'd jump in. Won't take too long over it hopefully. In the background I'm listening to Hamilton, Bohannon, Inside Out. A bit of classic disco from the 1970s, very cool stuff. Right, so I've got all the questions written down in this little small notebook, so let's just make a start and not beat around the bush. So number one, home city, record from your home city. Well, I live in Lancaster, which is a historic city in the northwest of England. There is a heavy metal band who got a record deal from Lancaster. I can't remember what they're called though, so I can't feature them. The best I can come up with is an album by a band who come from a place called Kendal, which is only, I don't know, maybe it's less than half an hour's drive from here, just kind of heading north. And they're called the Wild Beasts. They've actually broken up now, but they made maybe 4 or 5 albums back in the 2000s, I think it was. Really good. They had 2 lead singers, one of which had a very high voice, and they did very kind of florid, almost sort of Queen-like, very grand music, but very melodic, very lush, not orchestrated exactly. It's quite hard to describe. I'll put a link down below so you can check them out. I saw them live actually in Manchester. They're a really good band. Wild Beasts, yeah, from Kendal. Don't exist anymore unfortunately, but that's the way things go. Right, highly recommended album. I'm not going to take these out of the shrink today because it takes so long to put them away afterwards. I'm going to go for John Martin, Bless the Weather, which is an absolutely brilliant folk album from, when was this? From 1971 actually, so I've got another 1971 album coming up later. But yeah, beautiful album by the great guitarist John Martin. It's got a fantastic version of Singing in the Rain on it. John's inimitable vocals. Quite a hard record to get hold of that. On vinyl, I mean you can get it on CD quite easily, but I picked that up from my market trader guy for about, I think I got it for about £20. That was about four or 5 years ago now. Tips for beginners. So my tip for beginners, people who are just starting out buying records, is just don't get ripped off. You know, there are lots of record sellers out there who are really good people and who will cut you a deal and who won't overprice their stock. By the same token, there are record dealers out there who are just unscrupulous. They will overprice their records, and then they won't cut you a deal, and they will sell bad condition records. They won't check the condition. They'll stick stupid, crazy prices on. I mean, some of them just don't know what they're doing. They don't understand, so they'll just go onto Discogs and they'll look at the record, as in a mint version, and they'll stick that price on the record, on the copy of the record they've got, even though the one they've got is, completely beaten to hell. So yeah. Use word of mouth and go from your own personal experience, and only deal with people who seem to have some kind of moral compass, when it comes to selling records. There's a guy who comes to Lancaster on a Saturday, and I don't buy from him anymore because his stock is overpriced and the condition is not good. And there's another market trader in town now, Hightside Records, and all their stuff is much more reasonably priced, and they cut me a deal, and I can't really understand why that other guy's in business really, Right, number 4, show a record which got you further, deeper into music. So I've got a few for this. I'm going to show this one, Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green. I picked this up with my own money when I was about 16, I think, and I didn't know what to make of it at all. It was kind of heavy, dark, smouldering, psychologically difficult kind of British blues music, I suppose, and I was just used to listening to Wings' greatest hits and that kind of thing, so that was a bit of a puzzler. I didn't get into the blues for at least another probably 5 or 6 years, so I didn't know what to make of this. But when I came back to it, I kind of realised that had been a bit of a gateway record for me, in terms of trying to explore a bit deeper into the rich scenes of whatever you want to call it, black music, American music. This one came a bit later, Gree by Dr. John. I got into that in the probably mid 1990s. It was really through the Jules Holland connection, having been into Squeeze. I saw a documentary on the TV where Jules Holland was talking about Dr. John, and I'd never heard of him. I think he interviewed him on this show, and he played a bit of boogie woogie piano, I picked up a CD best of, and then I got really into him then. You know, I bought piano instruction videos, I saw him live 3 times, you know, got really into that kind of New Orleans funk music. It was nothing to do with any musical tradition that I'd grown up with. Obviously, as a British kid, you know, in the UK, I'd grown up with Top of the Pops and everything, so he was a bit of a mystery really, and I just loved all that kind of swampy New Orleans thing, and learning about the second line rhythms and everything. Just absolutely brilliant. This one too, Atlantic Soul compilation, I picked up at about the same time as the Dr. John. Not this record, this was sent to me as VCLT by Graham Watson a couple of years ago, but I had the CD. And I seem to remember I picked up a rough guide to soul music at the same time. It was a big thick book, and I'd never really got into American black music, so it was just really exciting. This album's got Arthur Connolly on it, you know, sweet soul music, which is such a clarion call. I was learning to play the drums at the time, so it was quite a useful record to listen to. Obviously you've got, on lots of these tracks, you've got people like Al Jackson and Booker T and the MGs, that kind of grooving, quite kind of sort of swinging sound, but it's also, it's very propulsive. It's not jazzy exactly, it's not funky either, it's just rhythm and blues rhythms, you know. I mean, it just blew my mind. Totally blew my mind. Okay, number 5, an obscure record. I don't know how obscure this one is, but it's, I mean, the actual artist himself is not obscure. It's Giorgio Ramoda, but this is an album he made with somebody called Chris Bennett. Now prepare for some nudity, because Chris is on the back here, surrounded by a couple of dancing robots, and this is a fairly average disco album, but you don't see it around very much. Don't really know how obscure it is, but yeah, I thought that would be quite a fun one to show. An artist whose records you collect, I'm going to go for Roy Orbison. About 2 years ago now, I made a decision to try and collect all the Bigos albums. The collection is proceeding very slowly. I find maybe 1 or 2 every year. Well, you know, I don't go rabidly looking for them, but as and when I find them, I do pick them up, and they're just beautiful things to have in the collection, you know. Band whose second album was better than the first. I think the Queen 2 album is better than the first Queen album. The first Queen album is great, but I think this album showed them stretching out a bit more. It's got all those incredible side 2 proggy tracks by Freddie Mercury, and the arrangements are a bit more ornate, and everything's starting to inch towards the stuff which they did on Night at the Opera. It's more grandiose, it's just more ambitious, I suppose, than what they did on the first record. So, Queen. Never need an excuse to show Queen. Right, over the page, a random pick. I've totally forgotten to choose a random pick. Just wait one sec. Okay, fortunately I do keep a smallish collection of records in the corner over there, so I just grabbed this one at random. This is Only in America. This is a collection of East Coast teen rock, 1959 to 1968. Brilliant record, actually. There's some cracking stuff on it. The Drifter by Ray Pollard, brilliant song. I might link to that if I can remember. Marv Johnson, who was a Motown recording artist. Really good. Cool stuff. I got that from a charity shop. Goodwill, as you say in America. Okay, where are we at? Most listened to album. This one was difficult. I mean, there's so many albums I've listened to a million times, you know. There's Revolver, there's Band on the Run. But I decided to go for this one. This is the Diffident Tilbrook album. This is the album that Glenn Tilbrook and Chris Difford made when they temporarily broke Squeeze up in 1982. They got a bit sick of the band, they broke it up, they made a complete flop album together, and then they got Squeeze back together a couple of years later. And this is a classic example. You know, it's the record was messed up really. It was produced by Tony Visconti, but he didn't end up mixing it. It was taken off him and was mixed by somebody else. And the mix is pretty bad, and there's quite a lot of sort of flouncy, fancy, kind of new jazzy type arrangements on it from the 80s. It's definitely got its faults, but I love it. And back in the 80s I just listened to it constantly all the time. Not this copy, I had a copy of it on cassette, which I listened to just for years, and it's still my kind of one of my main go-to comfort albums. yeah, I just don't know. It's just one of those personal connections that you have with albums, you know. Okay, so a crazy story. Now this one, this album is by a band called Candidate, and it's music based on the film The Wicker Man. It's a brilliant album. I got this back in the early noughties and I loved it. I took it with me on a holiday when I went to Morocco. I had it on a cassette. I just loved it. It's very atmospheric. It's kind of quite spooky. It's got a kind of almost sort of acid folk kind of quality to it, with great kind of vocals. But Jansk, the folk guitarist, guests on it. It's just a brilliant record. And then I discovered a few years ago, it was just quite amazing. I discovered that the guys who made this album were work colleagues of mine. It totally blew my mind. There were people, I was doing some work with them on a project, and I had no idea it was them. You know, I'd been to the pub with them, we'd had a good working relationship for a couple of months, and I just had no idea it was them at all. And by the time I came to discover that it was them, I'd lost touch with them, you know. So it was strange, genuinely one of the strangest experiences of my life, to get really into an album and then all the time, you know, I knew the guys in the band and I just had no idea. So anyway, far out stuff. Right, okay, so a genre that people might think I wasn't interested in, or might be surprised to find I was interested in. Well, you know, I talk about quite a lot of different kinds of music on my channel. I must admit, a bit like Jeff Party, I don't talk a lot about classical music, and that's because I find it quite intimidating to talk about, but I'm going to try and remedy that. I would like to talk about it more because I do love it. I'll show this record because it's got a wonderful cover. This is Villa Lobos, Bachianes Brasileiras, number 1 and number 5. Very evocative 20th century classical music. You know, he used saxophones and you know, it's got that kind of Latin American flavour to it. Absolutely fantastic. Like I said, I would like to talk more about classical music, but I know that there's quite a few people on the VC who know a lot more about it than I do. People who can talk about it with a lot of authority, and I don't necessarily think I can. But anyway, we'll see. Okay, so an album that comes from the year of your birth. Well, I was born in 1971. This album came out in 1971. This is Grand Funk and Survival. Fantastic cover. Love it. A 10-inch record, I'm going to skip this question because the only 10-inch record I've got is a 10-inch Supergrass compilation, and I've shown it on about 6 different videos. I'm sick of pulling it off the shelf and showing it. I mean, it's good, it's just that I've shown it too many times, you know. Okay, an interesting fact about a song or a record. Well, this is one that I discovered just a couple of nights ago. XTC, the Big Express. This was produced by a guy called David Lord, and he did some orchestrations on it as well. And it turns out David Lord, Paul McCartney approached him to do the string arrangements on She's Leaving Home on the Sgt. Pepper album. And David Lord turned him down because he didn't think the Beatles were a serious group. So Paul ended up going with somebody else. And then it was kind of like at least 10 years later, XTC approached him and he said yes to them. So he turned down the Beatles and said yes to XTC. So I thought that was quite good fun. A record with an animal on the cover. I'm going to go with Los Lobos, How Will the Wolf Survive? A rather alarming looking beast on it. Just have to change the record. Right, okay, an album with crazy artwork on the cover. I'm going to go with this album. This is Mental Notes by Split Enz. The front cover is pretty strange. The back cover is very disturbing. There's quite a disturbing gatefold on this album as well, but just to save time, I don't really want to get it out. Strange album as well, really, really strange. Good album found cheap. Right, now Jeff Party in his video, he mentioned Graham Parker as being an example of a rock artist whose records can be picked up dirt cheap. I'm going to go for the jazz angle instead and show Dave Brubeck, who was an absolutely brilliant jazz artist, and he's not really accorded the respect of all the great kind of black, you know, the kind of Miles Davises and the John Coltrane's. He's almost bracketed more with your Glenn Millers, you know, you can pick him up at 50p in charity shops, which is kind of strange in a way, because like I said, he was a brilliant pianist and he was a formal innovator, you know, think of all that stuff he did with the time signatures on Take 5 and Blue Rondo a la Turk, you know, a real kind of innovator and an important figure in American jazz and American music, but he seems to be a bit undervalued anyway. So this is one of his original albums, Instant Brubeck. The first time that the Dave Brubeck Quartet had ever been in a studio, apparently, according to the back liner notes. Interesting. An acquired taste album. Did I pick something for this? I think I did, yeah, okay, right, so I almost went with Captain Beefheart, but I think other people are showing him, so I've gone for Pink Flag by Wire. Kind of scratchy, edgy punk album from 1977. The first time you hear this, you just think, what on earth is this? You know, really kind of short songs, really abrupt, loads and loads of songs on the album as well. It just barrels through just one after another. There's a couple of longer songs, but it's the first time you hear it, it seems very bleak and almost nihilistic, but there's a kind of subversive sense of humour to the record and the energy as well, and I don't know, there's just some great moments on it. But I would describe it, broadly speaking, as an acquired taste. You know, all we need now is the recent purchase, and for this I'm just going to go with a nice mono copy of Paul Simon's first album, which I picked up on, I think it was on eBay recently. So yeah, didn't know it was mono when I bought it. I didn't look carefully enough, but I'm quite happy for it to be mono. I'm going to do a Paul Simon collection video soon, so I thought I'd better get that one into the collection on vinyl. So there we go. I did skip one question out. I skipped the pet peeve one out, but that's because that goes back to my tip for vinyl collectors, which is, you know, don't get ripped off. Okay folks, hope you enjoyed it. See you soon. Bye.